How are you guys doing? It is Monday, October 5th, 2020, out here in this quarantine. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to take you into yesterday's Elite performances, yesterday's Elite matchups, and at the same time, I'm going to jump into what to look forward to today as we are on a new day and as we're closing in on the final games of the fourth week of NFL football. So without further ado, I'm going to start jumping in the NFL just to show you what happened yesterday with yesterday's games. Starting with the early games, the Bengals were able to beat the Jaguars 33-25. And in this game for the Jacksonville Jaguars, their quarterback Gardner Minshew II with over 351 yards, 2 touchdowns and a pick. The running back James Robinson would lead the ground. He'd finish with 75 yards for the Jaguars. Through the air, DJ Chark would be their leading receiver. He finished with 95 yards and 8 receptions with 2 touchdowns. I'm looking at the defensive side of the ball. Josh Jones would lead the team in tackles. He'd have 11 on the day. Josh Allen, their young defensive end out of Kentucky, would get their only team sack of the day, and Myles Garrett would get an interception. Looking at the Cincinnati, their rookie quarterback and former first round pick, Joe Burrow, finished with 300 yards. He also had a touchdown and a pick on the day through the air. Joe Mixon would finish with 151 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground, and he'd also finish with 30 yards through the air to give him 181 yards and 3 touchdowns on the day because he also had a receiving touchdown. And in the receiving game, Tyler Boyd would be the team's leading receiver. He'd have 90 yards on 7 receptions. And also their elite wide receiver, A.J. Green, would finish with 3 yards on 1 reception for the day. Looking at the defensive side of the ball, Jesse Bates would finish with 10 tackles. And then Jordan Evans would finish with a sack, and so would Andrew Brown. With this win, the Cincinnati Bengals have won their first game of the season. They are now 1-2-1, as the Jacksonville Jaguars are now 1-3. Jumping out to Miami, the Miami Dolphins hosted the Seattle Seahawks, but the Seahawks were able to beat them 31-21. For the Dolphins, their quarterback Ryan Fitzpatrick with over 315 yards, and he also threw 2 picks. Ryan Fitzpatrick would also run for 47 yards on the ground, picking up a touchdown as well. Through the air, Devontae Parker would be their leading receiver with 110 yards on 10 receptions. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Elandon Roberts would lead the team in tackles. He'd have 9 of them. Emmanuel Ogbah would have a sack on the day, and so is Shaq Lawson. Looking at the Seattle, their elite quarterback Russell Wilson would complete 24 of his 34 passes for 360 yards, throwing for 2 touchdowns and 1 pick. He also had 5 yards on the ground, and just a great overall game for him. Through the air, Chris Carson would have 80 yards on 16 carries with 2 touchdowns on the day. DK Metcalf would be the Seattle Seahawks leading receiver. He'd have 106 yards on 4 receptions. David Moore would have 95 yards on 3 receptions and a touchdown on the day. And looking at the defensive side of the ball, Bobby Wagner, the Seattle Seahawks elite linebacker, will lead the team in tackles. He'd have 12 on the day. And the Seattle defense would also add in a couple picks. With this win, the Seattle Seahawks are now 4-0 in the NFC West as the Dolphins slip to 1-3 in the AFC East. Jumping out to Houston, the Houston Texans hosted the Minnesota Vikings as the Vikings picked up their first win of the season as the Texans dropped to 0-4. For the Texans, their elite quarterback Deshaun Watson would complete 20 of his 33 passes, throwing for 2 touchdowns, and also on the ground he ran for 9 yards. Through the air, Will Fuller, the fifth, would be the Houston Texans' leading receiver. He finished with 108 yards on 6 receptions. He also had a touchdown on the day. And then looking at the defensive side of the ball, Zach Cunningham and Benedict McKinney would lead the team with 10 tackles each, 10 tackles apiece. J.J. Watt, their elite defensive end, would finish with 3 tackles as well. Looking at Minnesota, their quarterback Kirk Cousins with over 260 yards and a touchdown. Dalvin Cook, their running back, would finish with 130 yards on 27 carries and 2 touchdowns. He also had 16 yards through the air. And Adam Thielen would be the Vikings' leading receiver. He'd have 114 yards on 8 receptions and a touchdown. And also Justin Jefferson, their wide receiver out of LSU, would finish with 103 yards on 4 receptions. On the defensive side of the ball, Eric Kendricks would lead the team in tackles. He'd have 12 on the day. And with this win, the Minnesota Vikings are now 1-3 in the NFC North, and the Houston Texans now drop to 0-4, like I just said. Jumping out to Dallas, the Cleveland Browns came into town and picked up their 3rd win of the season as they beat the Cowboys 49-38 after leading 28-14 at half. Cowboys scored 24 points in the fourth quarter, but they weren't able to come back on the Browns because the Browns aren't the Falcons. Looking at the Cowboys, their quarterback Dak Prescott would complete 41 of his 58 passes, throwing for 502 yards, 4 touchdowns and a pick. On the ground, their elite running back Ezekiel Elliott would run for 54 yards on 12 carries. In the receiving game, Amari Cooper will be the Cowboys' leading receiver with 134 yards on 12 receptions and a touchdown. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Donovan Wilson would finish with 10 tackles. He had a sack and a tackle for loss as well. By the way, Ezekiel Elliott did did fumble the ball. And then continuing on, going to Cleveland, their quarterback Baker Mayfield would throw for 165 yards and 2 touchdowns. Dearness Johnson would be the Browns' leading runner on the ground. He had 95 yards on 13 carries. For the Cleveland Browns, their elite wide receiver, Odell Beckham Jr., would run for 73 yards on 2 carries and a touchdown. And through the air, he finished with 81 yards on 5 receptions and 2 touchdowns. 3 total touchdowns on the day for OBJ. And the Cleveland Browns, I think this is their first 3-1 start in a very, very, very long time as a franchise. And with this loss, the Cowboys are now 1-3 on the season, their only win being the comeback win against the Atlanta Falcons. Staying in the NFC East, the Washington football team hosted the Baltimore Ravens and lost 31-17 to their in-state rivals or cross-state rivals. Looking at how Washington did, their quarterback Dwayne Haskins would throw for 314 yards on the day. He'd also get 3 yards on the ground and a rushing touchdown on the day. Through the air, Terry McLaurin would finish with 118 yards on 10 receptions. He'd be their leading receiver. John Bostic would be the leading tackler for the Washington football team. He had 14 tackles on the day. And then Kendall Fuller was able to get 2 interceptions for Washington. And in addition, he would also have 1 tackle on the day. Looking out to how the Baltimore Ravens played, their elite quarterback, Lamar Jackson, would complete 14 of his 21 passes, throwing for 193 yards and 2 touchdowns with an interception on the day. He also ran for 53 yards on the ground on 7 carries with a touchdown, giving him a grand total of 246 yards on the day and 3 touchdowns. Through the air, Marquise Brown would be the Ravens' leading receiver. He'd have 86 yards on 4 receptions. Their tight end, Mark Andrews, would finish with 57 yards on 3 receptions with 2 touchdowns on the day. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Patrick Queen would be their leading tackler. He'd have 12 tackles on the day, 3 tackles for loss. And with this win, the Baltimore Ravens are now 3-1 with this 31-17 win. And with this loss, the Washington football team is now 1-3 on the season. I'm going out to Detroit. The Detroit Tigers hosted the New Orleans Saints, and the Saints were able to get their second win of the season, beating the Lions 35-29. For the Lions, their quarterback Matt Stafford would throw for 206 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a pick. On the ground, future Hall of Fame running back Adrian Peterson would run for 36 yards on 11 carries and a touchdown on the day. Kenny Golladay would be the leading receiver for the Lions. He had 62 yards on 4 receptions and a touchdown. On the defensive side of the ball, Jamie Collins Sr. would be their leading tackle. He'd have 9 tackles on the day. Reggie Ragland would also add in a tackle. And then looking out to their elite corner, Jeff Okudah would also finish with 5 tackles on the day. Looking out to the New Orleans Saints, their GOAT-level quarterback, Drew Brees, would complete 19 of his 25 passes for 246 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. On the ground, Alvin Kamara would run for 83 yards on 19 carries and a touchdown on the ground. Latavius Murray would finish with 64 yards on 14 carries, and he had 2 touchdowns. Through the air, Emmanuel Sanders would be the Saints' leading receiver. He had 93 yards on 6 receptions. Traquan Smith would finish with 54 yards on 4 receptions and 2 touchdowns. Kamara had 36 yards through the air as well to go with his 83 on the ground. And continuing to the defensive side of the ball, C.J. Gardner-Johnson would finish with 6 tackles on the day, and Cameron Jordan would also finish with a sack. And with this win, the New Orleans Saints are now 2-2, leading the NFC South, as the Detroit Lions drop to 1-3. Jumping out to Charlotte, the Carolina Panthers were able to beat the Arizona Cardinals 31-21 yesterday to get their second win of the season. For the Arizona Cardinals, former offensive rookie of the year, Kyler Murray, would throw for 133 yards with 3 touchdowns through the air. He'd also have 78 yards on the ground to give him a little over 200 yards on the day. Through the air, DeAndre Hopkins, the Cardinals' their elite receiver, will lead the team in yards. He'd have 41 yards on 7 receptions. And on the defensive side of the ball, Jordan Hicks, their linebacker, finished with 12 tackles on the day. He'd also have 3.5 tackles for loss An incredible game. Looking at how Carolina did, their quarterback Teddy Bridgewater would throw for 276 yards, throwing for 2 touchdowns and a pick through the air. On the ground, Mike Davis would lead the team in rushing. He had 84 yards on 16 carries and a touchdown. Through the air, Robbie Anderson would be the leading receiver for the Panthers. He had 99 yards and 8 receptions. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Jeremy Chin would lead the team in tackles. He'd have 8 on the day. And Yetur Gross-Matos would also have a sack. And with this win, the Carolina Panthers would finish. They are now 2-2 on the season, as the Arizona Cardinals now dropped to 2-2 following 4 games being played. Jumping out to Tampa Bay, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were able to beat the Los Angeles Chargers 38-31. And I'm sorry, they have sole lead over the NFC South. For the Los Angeles Chargers, their rookie quarterback Justin Herbert would throw for 290 yards for 3 touchdowns and a pick. He's the second quarterback in NFL history with 900 yards in his first 3 games played. The other being Cam Newton. He would, on the ground, he'd also run for 14 yards. He'd be their leading rusher. The team would only rush for 46 yards on 23 carries. Through the air, Jalen Guyton would be the leading receiver. He had 72 yards on 1 reception and a touchdown. Keenan Allen would finish with 62 yards on 8 receptions. On the defensive side of the ball, Kazir White and Kenneth Murray Jr. would lead the team in tackles. They both have 10 on the day. And then continuing on, Joey Bosa, their defensive end, would finish with a tackle as well. Looking at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, their GOAT-level quarterback Tom Brady would finish. He would complete 30 of his 46 passes, throwing for 369 yards, throwing for 5 touchdowns and a pick. The pick was a pick 6. And on the ground, Ronald Jones II would finish with 111 yards on 20 carries. Through the air, Mike Evans, their elite receiver, would finish with 122 yards on 7 receptions and a touchdown on the day. And Rob Gronkowski would finish with 29 yards on 1 reception. On the defensive side of the ball, Levante David would be their leading tackler. He'd have 11 tackles on the day, one of them being for a loss. And then Carlton Davis would have the interception for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Michael Davis would be the player for the Chargers, who finished with a pick 6, a 78-yarder. With this win, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are now 3-1, and with this loss, the Los Angeles Chargers are 1-3. Jumping out to Los Angeles, to SoFi Stadium, the Los Angeles Rams were able to beat the New York Giants 17-9 to get their 3rd win of the season. For the New York Giants, their quarterback Daniel Jones would throw for 190 yards and a pick. On the ground, Wayne Gallman and Daniel Jones ran for 45 yards each. And through the air, Darius Slayton would be their leading receiver with 48 yards on 3 receptions. On the defensive side of the ball, Blake Martinez would be their leading tackler. He finished with 13 tackles on the day. Dexter Lawrence, their rookie defensive end, finished with 6 tackles on the day. And looking out currently to the Los Angeles Rams, their quarterback Jared Goff would throw for 200 yards and a touchdown. Through the air, Cooper Kupp would be their leading receiver with 69 yards on 5 receptions and a touchdown. On the defensive side of the ball, Taylor Rapp would finish with 8 tackles, and Morgan Fox would finish with a sack. With this win, the Los Angeles Rams are now 3-1. With this loss, the New York Giants are now 0-4. Jumping out to Las Vegas, the Vegas Raiders hosted the Buffalo Bills, and the Bills were able to get their 4th win of the season. They remain undefeated. For the Raiders, their quarterback Derek Carr would throw for 311 yards and 2 touchdowns. Through the air, Darren Waller, their tight end, would finish with 88 yards on 9 receptions. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Eric Harris would lead the team in tackles. He had 9 on the day. And then also Max Crosby, their second-year player, would finish with a sack as well. Looking out to the Buffalo Bills, their quarterback Josh Allen would throw for 288 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then on the ground, Devin Singletary would run for 55 yards on 18 carries, logging a touchdown for the team. Through the air, Stephon Diggs would be the Buffalo Bills' leading receiver. He had 115 yards on 6 receptions. And on the defensive side of the ball, Josh Norman would pick up a fumble recovery. Tremaine Edmonds, their elite linebacker, would lead the team in tackles. He'd have 12 on the day and half a sack for them. And continuing on, that would be how the Buffalo Bills played. And with this win, they're now 4-0 on the season, as the Raiders are now 2-2 in the AFC West. Continuing on, jumping out to Chicago. The Chicago Bears hosted the Indianapolis Colts and picked up their first loss of the season. Nick Foles would throw for 249 yards, and he'd throw for a touchdown and an interception. Through the air, Allen Robinson II would finish with 101 receiving yards on 7 receptions and a touchdown. On the ground, on the defensive side of the ball, Roquan Smith would finish with 13 tackles on the day, 3.5 tackles for loss. And then also Khalil Mack would finish the game with 2 tackles on the day, one of them being for loss. For the Indianapolis Colts, their quarterback Phillip Rivers would throw for 190 yards with a touchdown on the day. Jonathan Taylor, their young running back, would run for 68 yards on 17 carries. Zach Pascal will lead the team in receiving with 58 yards on 3 receptions. On the defensive side of the ball, Anthony Walker finished with 11 tackles on the day. Justin Houston finished with 4 tackles, and one of them being a sack. And with this win, the Colts won 19-11. And with this win, the Indianapolis Colts are now 3-1, and the Chicago Bears now fall to 3-1 after picking up their first loss of the season. Last but not least, jumping into last night's game, the San Francisco 49ers hosted the Philadelphia Eagles, and the Eagles were able to beat them 25-20 to gain the sole lead on the NFC East with only 1 win. For the San Francisco 49ers, Nick Mullins would throw for 200 yards with a touchdown and 2 picks. CJ Beathard would throw for 138 yards. On the ground, Jerick McKinnon would be their leading rusher with 54 yards on 14 carries. And through the air, their tight end, George Kittle, would finish with 183 yards on 15 receptions and a touchdown. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Quan Alexander would finish with 9 total tackles on the day. And Eric Armstead would finish with a tackle and a half a sack and a half a sack, and 5 tackles on the day. And jumping really quickly out to the Philadelphia Eagles, their quarterback Carson Wentz would throw for 193 yards with a touchdown and a pick. On the ground, Miles Sanders would finish with 46 yards on 13 carries. Through the air, Travis Fulgham would finish with 57 yards on 2 receptions and a touchdown on the day. On the defensive side of the ball, Rodney McLeod would finish with 8 tackles, so would Nathan Jerry and Marcus Epps. Cre'Von LeBlanc would finish with 6 tackles, and he had a sack on the day. But with this win, the Philadelphia Eagles are now 1-2-1, and with this loss, the San Francisco 49ers are now 2-2. Really quickly, looking out to the last game that needs to be played, are the last 2 games that need to be played. It'll be between the New England Patriots and the Kansas City Chiefs. They'll face off at 7:05 on CBS. Cam Newton is currently out to coronavirus, so that's going to be a big storyline, as I think the Chiefs are going to easily win that one. And also at 8:50, the Atlanta Falcons, the 0-3 Falcons, are going to take on the 3-0 Green Bay Packers, who have been surging. And the Falcons just can't seem to get a game right as of right now. Currently, once I cover the games tomorrow, I will go through the NFL standings and who's leading in certain statistical categories following this. But really quickly, I'm going to jump out to the NBA to take you to yesterday's matchup. And last night, the 5th seed of the East, Miami Heat, were able to beat the top seed out West, the Los Angeles Lakers, 115-104. Looking out to how the Los Angeles Lakers did, off the bench, their power forward, Kyle Kuzma, finished with 19 points and 3 rebounds in 23 minutes. Additionally, their other forward, Marcus Morris, would finish with 19 points and 6 rebounds. In 28 minutes, Rajon Rondo finished with 4 points, 8 rebounds, and 5 assists. And out of their starters, Anthony Davis, the Los Angeles Lakers' elite power forward, would finish with 15 points, 5 rebounds, 3 assists, and a couple of steals, as he shot 6 for 9 from the field in 33 minutes. He shot 1 for 2 from 3, and he made both of his free throw attempts. And their GOAT small forward, LeBron James, would finish with 25 points, 10 rebounds, and 8 assists, as he also had 2 blocks in the day. He also had 8 turnovers. He would shoot 9 for 16 from the field in 39 minutes. He shoot 1 for 5 from 3 and 6 for 9 from the free throw line. Jumping out to the Miami Heat, off the bench, Kelly Olynyk, their power forward, would finish with 17 points and 7 rebounds, adding a couple of steals in 31 minutes. Their small forward, Jay Crowder, would finish with 12 points and 8 rebounds. Their shooting guard, Duncan Robinson, would finish with 13 points and 5 rebounds, as he shot 3 for 10 from the three-point line. Their shooting guard, Tyler Hero, would finish with 17 points, shooting 6 for 18 from the field in 36 minutes. And of course, the biggest performance of the night would come from their elite small forward, Jimmy Butler, who would, in 45 minutes, he finished with 40 points, 11 rebounds, and 3 assists, also logging in 2 steals and and 2 blocks as well. He also had 5 turnovers. He shot 0 threes. He shot 14 for 20 from the field, 12 for 14 from the free throw line. He's the first player in NBA history to outscore, out-rebound, and out-assist LeBron in an NBA Finals game. So, that's incredible and an incredible performance. And with this win, the Miami Heat are now 3 wins away from clinching the NBA title for themselves, as the Los Angeles Lakers are now 2 games. Their next game will be tomorrow at 9 p.m. as, of course, the Miami Heat would be the home team in quotes for Game 4, as the Lakers look to try to increase their lead to 3-1 to move within a game of striking distance. Looking out to the MLB, playoff baseball starts today as the Houston Astros take on the Oakland Athletics on TBS at 4:07. Lance McCullers Jr. is going to make his start against Chris Bassett. And at 8:07 on TBS, the 5th seed New York Yankees are going to take on the 1st seed Tampa Bay Rays as Garrett Cole is going to face off against Blake Snell, former AL Cy Young winner. And then, so that's basically how baseball is going to fold out. And then the NLDS will follow on Tuesday as day 2 of the ALCS will also be tomorrow. Looking out to the WNBA, just to show you what's going on in that bubble, looking out to yesterday's game. The Seattle Storm were able to beat the Las Vegas Aces 104-91 to take a 2-game lead. Alicia Clark would finish with 21 points, 5 rebounds, and 6 assists to help the Storm get this win, help it collect it. And also Sue Bird also set a record for playoff assists as well last night. And Asia Wilson, the center who won the WNBA MVP this award this year, she finished with 20 points and 7 rebounds. As the Storm, I believe, are now 1 game away from clinching the WNBA finals. And last but not least, jumping out to global soccer in the Bundesliga in Germany, Bayern Munich was able to beat Hertha Berlin 4-3. All 4 goals for Bayern Munich were scored by their elite striker Robert Lewandowski. And the winning goal would come in the 93rd minute. It would be a penalty kick. So that was a good win for Bayern as they move up to, I think, 4th in their table. Looking now to the Premier League, Arsenal was able to beat Sheffield United 2-1. Saka would score the first and Nicolas Pepe would score the second. Manchester United would take one of the biggest losses in their history as Tottenham Hotspur came into town and beat them 6-1. Bruno Fernandes would score the first goal of the game as a penalty kick to go up 1-0, and Anthony Martial would pick up a red card in the 28th minute. And since then, Tottenham Hotspur went off. Son Heung-min Son, their forward from Korea, would finish with 2 goals on the day. And then Harry Kane would finish with 2 goals on the day as well, one of them being a penalty kick. The last goal, the one to give them their 6th. Aston Villa was able to beat Liverpool 7-2 yesterday. Mo Salah scored the only 2 goals for Liverpool as Watkins was able to get a hat trick and Grealish was able to score a couple goals for Aston Villa. And then a very embarrassing loss for Liverpool. Jumping out to Serie A. Internacional was able to draw with Lazio as both teams had a player that picked up a red card. Milinkovic-Savic would pick up the goal for Lazio as Laura Martinez would pick up the goal for Inter. Both teams picked up a point with this. And then Juventus and Napoli would end up being postponed as well. Jumping out to La Liga, Real Madrid was able to beat Levante 2-0 as Vinicius Jr. would score a goal in the 16th minute and Karim Benzema would score in extra time. FC Barcelona would also... They would also draw with Sevilla as Coutinho would score the only goal for Barcelona as De Jong would pick up the only goal for Sevilla. And looking at to Ligue 1, Lyon would tie with Marseille 1-1 as Aouar and Payet would be the only 2 goal players that scored a goal in this game. So with this, I really appreciate you. It is Monday, October 5th, 2020 out here in this quarantine. I'm James Sims. And I want to thank you once again for listening to all 23 minutes of my piece. Thank you once again, and peace out.